Okay.
Right. It's June 25th, 2020. This is the Simplify Groups and Projects Working Group. So we can jump right in. I don't know if Melissa's on, but we can probably. Gabe, have you chatted with her about these issues by chance?
Not those specifically, but I know the context, at least of the first one, enough to talk about it.
Okay. Yeah, go for it if you don't mind.
Sure. I can share my screen just so we are all on the same page.
Oh, Melissa's here anyway. But
Cool.
go for
Melissa,
it.
you
Go
can. Sure. This first one was like this issue originated out of a group conversation where Sid proposed that we could use groups as teams in GitLab and potentially just rename groups to teams. I think that is not the best thing to do, to call them teams, just because it limits what they are and also kind of is pointless, or I guess not pointless, but not necessary for merging groups and projects together. So maybe Melissa, you can talk a little bit more about what specifically we would do for this issue. If this is this like the cross-sharing stuff that we were talking about?
Yeah, so basically this is the, I think part of the complication of like why groups, projects, and it's all kind of conceptually difficult, right? Is because there's multiple use for groups, right? So we've talked about the concept of, can we kind of enable workflows where people create groups and then tell us what they're for, right? And whether that be there for team management or there for source code management, right? Or there for project management. So this would be like a first basically stab at doing something like that, right? Like where you create a group and you say, what is this for? And in this case, it would be like, it's for groupings of people. And we just present them with a view of a group that's smaller. It's not the full scope of everything that a group can do, right? But we started to kind of tailor it towards a specified use case. Now we've talked about this for like project management, right? And for kind of like having your repos and all your technology stuff. So that's where I'm coming from as far as like how it relates back to this work group.
In that example, Melissa, then, why would we still call it a group if it had very limited functionality? Doesn't that confuse things more?
We don't have to. We can call it something else. And it just behind the scenes, it's a group.
Yeah, okay.
And that, so we can basically go through this exercise and then figure out, does it make sense to do that for other functionality, right? Where we create like a special kind of like specialized version of a project or group, right? And just see where we end up.
I think the problem, there's two problems. One is we need to do things at the group level that you can only do at the project level, and probably vice versa. So like that's consolidating things together. Groups by themselves are not useful to be a team thing until they can have issues and like wikis and all like all of the stuff merged together, because I can't do project management at the group level because issues don't live at the group level, if that makes sense. And I think like that's where it feels like the best path is to figure out technically how to have parity between groups and projects, and while like doing that on the back end, do a bunch of sorry, my phone is starting. Solution validation and UX work to figure out how the user would want to consume that and set it up or use it, if that makes sense too.
It does. That was my other bullet point too, that it's like, have we done that where we just compare projects and groups and like what's available in each and what we would want available in both, or whatever the new object becomes.
Yeah. That's where I was thinking, like, if we make them have like we can do an audit, and I think that would be helpful, and I can take that on as a to-do. But also, I was just thinking, like, what is the end goal or ideal? What is our assumption about what the end state should be right now from like a capability standpoint? And to me, it's just like a namespace has access to all the resources. And I think this gets into some of the bullet points down below. Like, does it make sense to split resources away from projects? I don't know if we want to like talk further and circle back to these first two things after the conversation, because it seems like that might better inform what steps we want to take on these specific two issues.
So I think going back, right, separating out basically how you manage permissions from how you manage resources would be good from the access side, right? From our perspective of like, I know it doesn't help you for plan, right? But it would help us from the access perspective of just making things simpler of like, these are the objects you use to manage permissions, right? And you share them over to these resources, and it starts to make things a lot more clear. And then I think once we have that anchor of like groups of people, we can build on that to basically use them however you need to for planning, project management. And I do think it makes sense to separate all of these out, because that's kind of like what people are doing, except we're not giving them good tools to do that, is my opinion.
I'm wondering, do we have the concept of setting permissions at a certain level or namespace in that whole hierarchy, and then like permissions rolling down or something like that? Like, just get clear on those rules, because you could set it right at the top and then build as much as you want underneath, and they would all consume one permission setting from the top or something like that.
Yeah, we do have that, and it's actually it works well for some customers, but it's problematic for others. Basically, it's not flexible enough right now.
You could put it at the top, or you could refine it further down, or make it as complex as you wanted, or something like that. But
yeah, there are limits to like what we can do, which is another kind of other separate problem.
Gabe, you spoke about the advantage of condensing everything down to one thing, as we spoke about before, like groups and projects becoming namespaces. You can attach resources to them. Does that also solve the problem that you shared your video about last Friday, whereby you basically want people to view stuff like from their maybe sibling groups within that hierarchy?
That does not solve that problem. What we talked about in Slack was the permissions problem. So like the first step would be, if you consolidate all resources and they're available in namespace, you can turn the monitor off. They're isolated from one another, such that like it is easy to disable or enable certain resources that are available within a specific place. Then the next step would be, how do you assign maybe this is limited to only certain resources that are assignable, like an epic or an issue or a merge request, but how do you assign a resource to a sibling group, right? Or sibling namespace, that's what I'll just call it for now. So that it shows up both in the sibling namespace as well as in the canonical namespace where it was created. So that would be like the second step after you have everything that is available in the same namespace, and we have like the hierarchy stuff working well within a given namespace structure. And then after that would be the enabling other people in sibling namespaces to be assigned certain resources.
And are we sure that assignment is the way that we want to solve that problem?
No, it's working based on what customers have said that they would like to do or see. They more or less want to be able to have a single resource show up in two sibling namespaces. Right. So if you use a namespace for a team and you use a namespace for a repo, the repo might have many teams working on it or namespaces contributing to it. So you would want the issue to be there, but since the change is happening against that repo, but then you would also want it to be in the team's namespace so they could associate it to an iteration. They could track, their capacity playing and do all that stuff against that issue within their own namespace without having to context switch out.
Yeah, so my feeling around that is doing it via assignment could make things quite complex, because then you start running into stuff like what happens when you've contributed to an issue but you're not assigned to it anymore. And I know we've actually already run into that issue when members get removed from groups. Can we solve the same problem but more in like a way that would be familiar with like our existing permission structure? So I won't go into detail because it will probably get too complicated by talking about groups. But I think one of the things we suggested in Slack last week was, instead of assigning the group that you want to share with to an issue, can you not kind of make that group a member of everything that you want them to have visibility of, i.e. every group or project? And then basically in maybe issue boards, give the ability to users to be able to change the scope of what their issue board looks like. Because at the moment, an issue board only shows you kind of the content of the project that you're in. But can we not change it so that you can kind of like scope your issue board to the top of the tree, and then it will view and it will show you everything that you have permission to below that?
The problem with that is think about the use case of our own team, where we have the GitLab project. I have my issue board at the top level group, but in the proposed namespaces, the way it would work is we have all of our issues in the GitLab project. In a separate namespace tree, I have my team, which is like the project management team. I don't want to see the 40,000 issues that are in the GitLab project or in the GitLab group, right? Even though my team would technically have permission to see them all, I want to see things that my team is responsible for doing, because a lot of the things are like just noise, and it also slows down search. There's a lot of things that aren't applicable to my team. And so just like having all that stuff show up, even though my team has access to it and permissions to view those things somewhere else, doesn't really help like the concept of we basically still have to rely on labels for team assignment, if that makes sense. And I think that's where what we're trying to get around or solve for is, how can we have the concept of a team, have the team see the things that only they need to be working on or scheduling, and not see everything else, even if they have permission to see it, like in their team space.
What if we expanded is it mostly issues that we're worried about right now as far as like team space?
Issues, merge requests, probably epics. I think like that the things that are you can assign to an individual, I would say, is you would want to be able to assign to a team, right?
I think that, so I get the point, Gabe, that makes sense. But I also feel that assignment still doesn't feel like the way to solve that problem to me, in that it's quite restrictive in that you only see things that you're assigned to. Now, I guess there's also a use case whereby you would want to create a board, which is all of the things that you like have visibility or responsible for, but isn't directly in the project that you're in at that given point in time. So imagine like me individually. So I'm the engineering manager for access and import. Now, it would be nice if I could create, if they were kind of two different groups, I would like to have like single visibility of both of those, but I don't want to have to be assigned to every single issue in the other group just to show it to me. I would like to basically be able to create a board which is just basically scoped to those two different groups.
Yeah, wouldn't that just be, instead of having a sort of a group label in your sort of filtering of the board, wouldn't it just be, instead of a group label, it would be like a group? You would have some sort of like primitive that meant this group and everything that's sort of owned by that group.
Yeah, that's what I meant by assignment, is that the resource would be assigned to a namespace, not an individual, right? So, yes.
Right. Okay. So, that makes sense. But I think my point is maybe we should do that via membership rather than assignment.
That's like, okay, well, let's go down that path. If you do that, we use GitLab, our current GitLab, for example, and we have a separate hierarchy for all of our groups, like our product teams, how would I just see the things that my product team is responsible for in my area?
So to Alex's point there, you would create a project and just scope it to the group that your team is responsible for.
But the issues live in the GitLab project.
I was thinking you'd create them in that namespace and then everyone's would roll up. So you'd have to actually create them on that namespace. That's how I was visualizing it.
Sure, but that means that we could never, it wouldn't solve our problem because we have an open core business model. And I know like we're unique in this, but it's still the same kind of thing of we have to have the issues live in a project so it's easy for, in a shared project, so it's easy for the wider community to contribute and see what's going on, right? So yes, I could create them in my own namespace, but then the wider community would have to figure out how to navigate over there. To do that, we'd have to regularly move issues from the the GitLab project to my namespace when they get created there. So I guess that's kind of.
So it feels to me like, and I don't know if we're going into too much detail on this specific point, but it feels to me that like labels is a way to solve that problem, rather than kind of like introducing a special case for that use case.
Or a saved, yeah, like a saved filter that has a different name, because I use that filter everywhere, on the issue list, on the boards, anywhere I'm looking. Like it's like a false container around my stuff.
So oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so like that's the problem with using labels to solve all these things, is then we have to build filters into every view. So you can filter things down. Our analytics and reporting gets clunky because then you have to like specify which labels are your team labels. Like you have to do all these things to work around the fact that we can't have a team workspace and have issues live in a different place that are like assigned to a team, right? And this is where it is really simple. If you look at the team in isolation and think about the use case of, well, just let the team create issues in their own namespace. And then we could optimize for like linking issues in that namespace to a sibling merge request. But it still doesn't solve the problem of even like it wouldn't be valuable to me using GitLab, right?
If I could save those though as my starting profile, and every time I hit that 30,000 list, it was scoped to that out of the gate, that would be more useful to me if it was saved higher up.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if as a sort of boring workaround, if there's like a way to make a new special type of label. I know that may be scary, but like it's a new type of scoped label or something that is your team prefix. Maybe on the behind the scenes, it's still a label, but it's treated at a higher level. And then you have the ability, it's like Jira prefixes every single issue. You could just use that mechanism to filter at the level you're at for the project or team you're interested in.
So there's a proposal out there to have labels for users. It's like an issue that a couple of people have been contributing to, specifically to help solve for like teams at GitLab. So that could be a way to solve this. But what I will say is like if you look competitively at the enterprise agile tools, right? Most of them have a concept of a team and the team space and a list of users that are a team, right? And metrics around those people. So that's something to be aware of. Actually, Jira does not have this. And that's a big customer ask of Jira. And they've now started to kind of build some of that framework. So we can go another route, but I think eventually we will need to build something that's like teams.
Yeah, I think like that's where just to highlight the problem a little bit more, like we're building iterations into GitLab, and the way that they're going to work, the reports will work is if you create your top level group, and let's say there's a subgroup in a project, and then you have an issue that can be assigned to this iteration, right? If it's assigned to that iteration, the iteration is going to show up down in this project and be scoped to just the issues that are associated to the iteration from the project. So like this, you could basically get a team level report here if the issues were to live here. But like for me as a product manager, I want to see the velocity of my team over n number of previous iterations. And since all of our issues, like all of the teams share the same project for all the issues, there's no way for me to see the velocity of my team unless I build in some special logic to calculate velocity for every single label that exists in the product, and track that in the iteration report view, right? So like we're looking at being able to do things like group by label. So I could group it by my team label, and then we could see like the team labels there. But then I would have to also calculate on the fly my velocity for every single label that exists in GitLab, which is about 1,000, because we can't determine specifically what to Justin's point, what is a team label, what's not, which ones do we want to track velocity against them, which ones do we not. And it gets a lot simpler if like I can just have my team, my issues that my team is responsible for in one place so that I can look at one report and not have to do a bunch of filtering and know that it's just my team. But we can't have that in GitLab unless we change the way that we do issue tracking as an entire company and break everything out into subgroups, and then ask the community to go like, I guess, look at the top level group and then filter that way, which is messy. Do you kind of get like the kind of problem?
Sorry, Gabe, why do you have to, what's so messy about going to the top level group that presumably would sort of be an umbrella for everything else underneath it, all the subgroups?
Just that, like, that's where the community would have to go look for issues, right? They wouldn't be able to go look at the GitLab project. They would have to go look at, and I think this is like the crux of the problem is where you have one group of people who are looking at a repo and the issues that are going to be changing things on that repo, which would be like the wider community. That's what they know. And then you have this other group, which is the team who is working on the repo, and it's one of many teams, but they want to have their own space where they have their own issues scoped to just them without having to use a bunch of filters.
So instead of now where you assign a label of like a group label to an issue, if somehow behind the scenes that actually meant that you assign that issue to a group, and so the group took some sort of ownership of that issue, and then you had like the GitLab project, which, as we've been talking over the weeks, that it somehow magically is a group project sort of thing, one sort of union, and that is it has sort of kind of all these subgroups, all the groups, access and knowledge and whatever else, they all sort of feed back into the core group, which is, as you keep calling it, the project, but really it's kind of the group project as we've been talking. Does that make sense?
Yes. So that's sort of within this issue, what I was exploring. And this is where it might be messy. We talked at length in Slack, but like if I have my top level namespace, let's say this is the GitLab org namespace, right? And then let's say that this over here, this XAM namespace is the GitLab project that has the repo in it, and it has all the issues, and the issues live there, right? It's the idea of being able to then to assign, like, it still lives in this origin because this is where it was created, but it can be assigned to a sibling namespace and it would show up in both places. That's like where I was saying assignment would solve the problem, because then like it can still show up here because that's where it was created, but once it gets assigned into this like other namespace, it becomes like a read-only guest access within this namespace or something. I'm not sure how to do that, or like, maybe we just don't solve this problem for ourselves because we're an outlier, which is also a possibility.
I think you can kind of do this with sort of group links, sharing into groups, and if a subgroup owns an issue, and then it sort of, that subgroup is shared into sort of a core group, then you can sort of control those links and the access between what one group can see into another group, and so on. I mean, to me, it seems sort of achievable what you're describing with kind of what we've got at the moment.
Yeah, especially if teams work the way individual assignees do. And I'm not sure if that's how you're picturing it, but like you can assign to yourself from multiple people, but there could be another team assignment field that would give you that group assignment a level above, or the sort of namespace assignment.
I think that there's two different problems here, though, it seems to me. One is like sharing resources across siblings. And then another one is what Gabe described in terms of team reporting, possibly with like the GitLab setup where all issues are in a single project. And I'm wondering if, so I think assigning a team to an issue, I think makes sense from a reporting point of view. I think it could solve that problem. But I don't think that in itself solves the sibling problem. So imagine in the example you've got, I don't know if you can get the screen share back up, Gabe.
I can.
Where if for example, I am the owner of XBY namespace, and I want to create a issue board that shows me everything in that namespace, but everything also in XAM namespace, but not just stuff that's assigned to me. I just want visibility of all of it. I don't want to have to go into XAM and assign everything to my team. Equally, you don't want to give me permission to view everything for X namespace, because then I'm going to be able to see everything. So it feels like what you would need to do is you'd need the ability to create an issue board somewhere, presumably in my own namespace, XBY, where I could scope that issue board to various groups that I'm interested in. So I could say, for this issue board, show me all issues from XBY and also all issues from XAM. And I'm allowed to do that because the team that I'm in is a member of the XAM namespace.
That would solve 50% of it. And I think it's something that folks have talked about wanting, which is scoping issue boards or boards as a whole to different projects. So that makes sense. And I think that's a step in the right direction. So I don't disagree with that as an MVC. But then the next question is like, are we going to force users to always rely on a heavy use of filters in order to scope things to just the things that they want to see when they have resources shared, like in that manner, right? Because that's also cumbersome. Like right now, every single view that I as a product manager go to, whether that's issues, issue board, epics, roadmap, I have to add in filters to make it meaningful because there's so much stuff. Which if that's what we decide we have to do, then the solution, I think, Kristen, you said like, well, let's just create some save filters capability so you can save it and apply it globally. And like, that's also something we've been talking about. So I'm not opposed to any of those things. I think it would really come down to, this is where I was proposing, and we're running out of time. Like I would like to start doing some usability and UX solution research on what would be the best thing for the end users. Because I think we've like determined that we can merge groups and projects into a namespace and have all the resources live there. Is that correct? So if we know we can technically do that, that's a technical feasibility piece, I think. And then the next piece is, well, what's the ideal user experience? And if we were to just do that blanket sharing, like from XAM into XBY, and let you scope all your issue board to the groups that you have shared access to, would that be sufficient for users? And I think I would really like to work with you, Mike, to figure out how we want to do that research.
Yeah, I think one other piece that I'm curious about is some of these problems that we have, right, where we have to heavily use filters because we have like one big group that we're all in and all our stuff is there. I wonder if that's a unique problem to us or if that's a problem for customers, right? Because maybe the solution is easier if people have things more divided than us.
Yep.
That's a great question. So I was also going to ask if it feels more painful to us because of the way GitLab's structured. Like we have to do that, and there's a lot of heavy filtering we do. But I have an assumption I'd like to validate that other customers in other tools face the same problem. So for our customers that are using GitLab for SCM and CI/CD, but Jira for project management, Jira is the same way. You have to use a lot of filtering. They have JQL as a portable object to let you filter. So is that really a problem, or is it because our filtering maybe isn't as mature as we'd like it to be, and it's more painful to use that we feel this strongly? So it's something we should dig into, Mike, in that validation. Okay, we're at time. We're over time. I will. The last couple things we can push to next week. But thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
One other thing too, Liam, I answer your question about first product change we would want to see from this process would be the merging of the resources into the same place, with like not worrying about the cross share access and all that other stuff. But we still, that's like a real tangible problem, and the duplication of like the first thing we can change. And we don't even have to necessarily change the core user experience at this point for that, just making those resources available at each place and then doing something behind the scenes to have them use the same basic shared construct. So.
Thanks. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Cool.